Hope everyone is doing well. We are going to do chapter 8, which in this edition of The Path of the Righteous Gentile, page 84, chapter 8, sexual relations. Again, a couple of brief introductions before we see the actual chapter inside. Number one, if we'd be discussing this 10 or 20 years ago, I think we'd be taking a little bit of a different approach. Not that any of the laws changed. No, they've been the same for the past thousands of years, ever since the creation of man and ever since Hashem, ever since God commanded Adam and Chava, Adam, and then Noach, and then, of course, by the giving of the Torah, 3,300 years ago. What I mean is things which most people in this part of the world, or however you want to put it, most common people would consider it certain things a given, and there were certain things which we would consider obvious as wrong, and I would even go so far as to say as disgusting. And it's not my personal opinion, but actually the Torah refers to certain things as toyeva, which I guess in English would be translated as abomination. However, without getting all philosophical, but factually, within the past couple of decades, really very recently, so many things have changed. And right now, I'm speaking about the negative. Obviously, there have been tremendous changes for the good, and there's lots of positive changes, and that goes without saying. And I can go on and on about that. But at the moment, I'm referring to things which are extremely wrong, negative, etc. So, therefore, what I mean is we need to learn this, realizing that we can't take things for granted. And when it says over here certain things, we should understand that it needs to be said. So, okay, that's one thing. Now, another thing is, and I've mentioned this many times, that we learn many of the laws, all of the 7 Noahide commandments, we learn them straight from the verses in the scripture, in the Torah. However, just as not one of the 613 commandments for the Jewish people can be properly understood without the oral tradition. The written law is telling it to you almost in code form or in general terms or hinting to it, and then you need to have the oral tradition, the Talmud, etc. Similarly as well, when it comes to the Noahide commandments. So I'm going to start off with reading the verse. This is right after God created Adam, the first man, Adam, and then he took from his, in English, I guess they say it's his rib. It really says it's his side. And I'm not sure that rib is the wrong translation, because possibly rib does mean that, because those bones of that cage that's kind of on our sides. So maybe the proper accurate translation is rib, but the word itself means side. So God took a physical part of Adam, and from that he created the woman, which in English they translate Chava as Eve, which I don't think is a nice translation, because it probably is short for evil, and it might have to do with some other religions and cultures if you do the research of how they got that word. But at any rate, and then right afterwards, Adam, man, says, well, this is a part of me, flesh of mine, and for this one I will call Isha, because it's a play on the word grammatically, because she was taken from Ish. Ish means man, therefore the female version of Ish would be Isha. Okay, then comes our verse. This is a verse that we're going to be basing pretty much this chapter on. He's going to quote the verse right away in English, but I want to first read it in the text, read the verse, and then share with you Rashi's commentary, the main commentary. This is Genesis 2:24, chapter 2, verse 24. It's in Parshas Breshis, the first section in the Torah. Al Kain, therefore, Yazov Ish, a man should leave es aviv ve'es imoy, his father and his mother, v'davak be'ishtoi, and he should cleave to his wife, v'hayu levasar echad, and they will be for one flesh. On that verse, the primary commentary, Rashi, says on the words, therefore, a man should leave, that this is actually Ruach HaKodesh. This is the Holy Spirit, meaning this is the narration of God speaking. Because you might mistakenly think that this is a continuation of the previous verse where man is making the declaration of, oh, well, look, what do I call her? Well, I'm Ish, so she's Isha because she was taken from me. And then you might misunderstand that this verse 24 is man speaking. So therefore, Rashi is saying, no, it's the narrative, it's God speaking. And then he says, very important, this is what's relevant for us here now. To forbid on the Noachites, on the children, the descendants of Noah. Now, mind you, this is way before Noah was even born. This is right after the first people were created. This is the sixth day of creation. So to forbid on all of the human race, all the descendants of Noah, the idolatry, all the forbidden relations, who they cannot marry, who they may not have physical, intimate relations with. Okay, so we're going to learn things out from that verse, from the words in that verse. And now let's see it inside. Again, page 84, if you have the same edition, chapter 8, sexual relations, which of course is one of the 7 Noahide commandments, which is known as arayos, which means sexual relations. One, it is written, the verse we just said, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and shall cling to his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Genesis 2:24. According to the Holy Spirit, this verse comes to instruct mankind concerning forbidden relationships. Again, that's Rashi. Rashi comments that the phrase, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, forbids the man to have sexual relations with the wife of his father, not his mother. Okay, his father had more than one wife, or either at the same time, polygamy, or after he divorced his mother, or after his mother had died, whatever the case may be. Because this woman was at any point ever his father's wife, even after the death of his father, when she's no longer considered a married woman. So it's not because she's a married woman, which we're about to discuss. No, she's a single woman. She's allowed to get married. She's available because her husband died. So the son of her husband from a different woman may not ever marry this woman, have any type of intimate relations with her. Obviously, this also includes his natural mother. That goes without saying. That a person is never allowed to be intimate in that way, have sexual relations with his own mother, even if she's not the wife of his father. In other words, he was born out of wedlock, and they were never married. So she was never his father's wife. Nonetheless, it's his mother. The phrase cling to his wife, which is in the verse, the dovak bishtoi, cling to his wife, comes to teach us that he shall have relations with his own wife and not another man's wife. Okay, so that's how we know that it is forbidden for anyone to have relations with anyone else's wife. In Hebrew, that is termed as Eshes Ish. In the Talmud, that comes up a lot, primarily within the Jewish law, between Jews, but that's what it's called, Eshes Ish. It's a capital offense. It's a very, very severe sin for a person to have relations with someone else's wife. And we learned that out for the Noachites from these words, the two words, V'dovak v'ishtoi, and he shall cling to his wife, to exclude anyone else's. To his wife, when it says ishtoi, that one word, comes to teach us that he shall have relations with the opposite sex, not with a male, because it says ishtoi, not with his husband, which there is no such thing, that doesn't exist, that's not possible, but in other words, not with his male partner, not allowed. So we learned that out from the word that says the ishtoi, which means his female wife. So that is where we learned that from. Then it says, and they shall be of one flesh. Those three words, v'hayu levasar echad, and they shall be for one flesh, comes to exclude any animal. For an animal is not of one flesh with a man. So we learn a whole lot from that one verse. Not one's mother, not one's father's wife, even if she's not his mother. And then, of course, the very general one, no one else's wife while she's married to someone else. And forbidden of homosexuality or bestiality, or whatever the term is. Okay, not allowed. That's where we learn it out from. 2. A Noachite is forbidden to have relations with certain relatives and others to whom he or she is not related. And here's the list. This is straight out of the Rambam, Maimonides, who of course gets it from the Talmud, which is the oral tradition. This is not rabbinic, this is biblical, even though it's not spelled out in the text. But as I keep on saying, nothing is really detailed clearly in the text. It's all based on the text. So here's the list of people that a person is not allowed to have relations with. These are mother, even if his birth had been the result of her having been seduced or raped. It doesn't matter how she's his mother. By choice, by accident, makes no difference. If biologically she is his mother, he's never allowed to have relations with her. Father, in other words, and that would include for a woman. In other words, we're not only speaking now to the man, we're speaking to men, both sides of the fence, so to say, men and women. So it's forbidden to have relations with one's father. So if we're talking to the son of the father, then obviously it's forbidden because of homosexuality. But in addition to that, it's an additional sin because it's his father. And otherwise we could say we're talking to the daughter, that she can't have relations with her father. Both are true. Daughter, that a man is not allowed to have relations with his biological daughter. Father's sister, nothing to do with whether she's married or not. She's not anyone else's wife. It's the aunt, meaning it's the father's sister. We're not going to use the word aunt because the father's brother's wife, after the father's brother died, is arguably his aunt. Either you call her his former aunt, and yet that may not be forbidden. So I don't want to use the word aunt. So I'm using the term, as it says here, father's sister. She's forever the father's sister. And even after the father dies, you're not allowed to have relations with your father's sister. And finally, mother's sister. Same thing. Mother's sister, even after the mother dies, it doesn't matter. And even if she's not married, of course. Now, you'll notice that there are other people that we didn't mention. But this is the initial list. So we listed here what? 6 people. Mother, father, daughter, father, sister, mother, sister. 5 people. Okay. Number 3. Under the 7 universal laws, one is permitted to have relations with individuals related through marriage after the death of the relative. That's why I said before, let's not say and. According to some opinions, this even includes a man's father's wife, not his mother, after his father dies. We just said previously that you cannot have relations with your father's wife even after the death of the father. So that is controversial. Some say that it is permitted. Those falling in this category are, who are the following people that a person would be allowed to. Father's wife, not one's mother. Again, that's going according to this opinion. Brother's wife, after a person's brother dies, he is permitted to marry his former sister-in-law, his brother's wife. And don't confuse this with, those of you that are very knowledgeable might remember the mitzvah that's called Yibum, where if someone died childless, so then his brother or one of his brothers has a mitzvah, is commanded to marry the widow. We're not talking about that. Okay, we're not saying that it's a mitzvah. We're simply saying that a Noachide is permitted to marry his deceased brother's wife. Wife's sister, again, after his wife dies, he's allowed to marry her sister. Daughter-in-law, and again, after his son dies, he's allowed to marry his daughter-in-law. And finally, stepdaughter. Stepdaughter is not your biological daughter, and therefore, even though one is not allowed to marry his daughter, as we said in number 2, stepdaughter is permitted. Okay, that's the way it works for the Noachites. Four, it is the opinion of some authorities that the father's wife is forbidden even after the death of the father. And the prohibition is thought to include women that the father merely had relations with, even if they were seduced or raped by the father. So going back to what we said in number 1, where we said a person cannot marry his father's wife even after his father dies, even though it's not his mother and his father's no longer living, unlike the opinion we brought down here in number 3. Now we're taking it even further. There are those that say that not only is it forbidden to ever marry one's father's wife, even after the father is dead, but anyone that had relations with the father, one can't marry. And that could be a problem if the father was very active in that area. Well, then, how could one know? But presumably, one would know if his father had relations with this person. And if he does know, then it would be forbidden for a person to have relations with her. Other authorities permit relations with the father's wife after his death, but forbid relations with either the father's or the mother's maternal sister. All right? So that would be one's aunt, the father or the mother's maternal sister. So even if it's only half, as long as it's coming from the mother, so then it's forbidden. So bottom line is that there's a dispute here and an argument, and practically speaking, I'm pretty certain that we would say be strict and avoid it. Follow the stricter opinion. The question then arises, what happens? Okay, this is hypothetical, but it could definitely happen. One didn't know, and he married one of these women that is a controversial case. He married his father's wife after his father died, and then he finds out that in Jewish law, for a Noachite, it is an argument as to whether he's allowed to or not. Well, that would be a question at that time to ask an authoritative rabbi. And my assumption would be Could be wrong. My assumption would be that they would say that under those circumstances, because you already married her, you may remain married and rely on the opinion that says that it's fine. However, if you're coming to ask before you marry her, and you're saying, may I marry my father's wife after they're no longer married, the father is no longer living, then they would tell you, no, you may not, even though some opinions say that you may. That's my guess. It may be wrong. It may tell you that you do have to get divorced because it is a question over here of a capital offense. So how can you continue living in sin? So the rabbi might say that you actually do need to get divorced, but I don't think that that's what they would say. When the case actually is relevant, it should definitely be asked by a competent person in the laws of the 7 Noahide commandments who is authoritative to give a legal ruling. Number 5, it is argued in the name of Rabbi Akiva that all relationships that warrant the death penalty in a Jewish court of law also will receive the death penalty in a Noahide court of law. This includes a relationship that exists through marriage with a mother-in-law or daughter-in-law. The reason is that since one's father's wife is forbidden, this is extended to include others related through marriage, a mother-in-law being related through marriage. Such relationships are punishable by the courts. That's one opinion. Other authorities say that only the father's wife is in this forbidden category, and they exclude other relatives through marriage. So there again, you'd have the same issue. Can a person marry their former mother-in-law, meaning she's no longer married to her husband or what have you, or she never was married, whatever the case may be. So again, this is a dispute, and again, the safest thing would be to avoid it. Okay, now we're going to spell out what we kind of mentioned in the beginning that we got through the verse, but now we're going to spell it out. Number 6, forbidden relationships other than with relatives. Until now, we were discussing relatives. Here are the people that one cannot have intimate relations with that are not relatives. They are a man with another man's wife, a man with a male with a male, a person, male or female, with an animal. In other words, it goes both ways. Even a woman is forbidden to have relations with a male animal. Not only is a man forbidden having relations with a female animal, but also a woman is forbidden to have relations with a male animal. Number 7, a man is forbidden to have relations with another man's wife, whether she is the wife of another Noachite or the Jewish wife of a Jew. Now you'll notice that a Jewish wife of a Jew, it's very important to point it out. Although a Jewish man is forbidden to marry a Noachite woman, okay, it's a big prohibition. A Jewish man cannot marry a non-Jewish woman. And from the perspective of the Jewish man, there is no marriage. They're not married. I don't care how they got married, how many officiating anybody. So even if it's by the law of the land, a legal marriage, and they went to a judge and they have a marriage contract, etc., a Jewish man and a non-Jewish woman, legally by Jewish law, are not married. Nevertheless, the bond of marriage exists for her, and she is forbidden to other men. All right? I wouldn't have guessed that, but it makes sense. Makes sense. So in other words, as far as a Noachite is concerned, she's a married woman. Under the 7 universal commandments, a woman is considered to be a man's wife when the couple has sexual relations with the intent that it constitute marriage. Because you see, otherwise, we have the question, what makes them married? In Jewish law, it's very clear, very, very clear how you legally are married. Okay? There's 3 ways that a Jewish man can marry a Jewish woman. But by Noachites, what do we say? The same 3 things? Like, how does it work? And what happens if you have 2 people that are living together and they don't consider each other to be husband and wife? They're just living together. So is she forbidden for another man because she's a married woman? But she's not married, but they are living together as husband and wife. So we learned now, it's kind of simple. If the 2 of them ever had relations with the intention of marriage, otherwise, they're 2 single people that are living together, that are having relations, and neither of them is married. And therefore, they wouldn't need a divorce by Jewish law. Now, of course, many of these things can lead to lots of what ifs and all sorts of questions. But right now, we're learning it in a general, hypothetical way. We're just saying the generalization, the rules. Number 8, a man is not punished by the courts for having relations with a married woman unless he has sexual intercourse with her in the normal manner, vaginal penetration, inasmuch as this is considered to be the way for a man to be with a woman. So that's if she's a married woman. It doesn't mean that it's permitted to do other things, but we're speaking as far as a capital offense, that back in the day, the court would put the person to death. It had to be that they had normal, regular relations. But with other forbidden relationships, a man is liable for punishment for sodomy, or any other sexual act. It does not have to be the normal way of intercourse. So that's a huge difference. So that is reserved for Ashes Ish, for another man's wife. Okay, that is based on the Rambam, Maimonides, and the commentary of the Kesef Mishnah. Yep. Basing it, of course, on the Talmud. That is what the Kesef Mishnah says over here. All right. That's the difference. So for someone else's wife, it's got to be the normal way. Otherwise, if it's any of the other forbidden people, so then even if it's not done in that way, as long as they had sexual relations, it is a capital offense. Number 9, a man is liable for punishment even if there was only slight penetration during the act of intercourse. However, some are of the opinion that one is not liable for only slight penetration. And again, the Jewish law, believe it or not, goes into great detail over here. And the question is, how far was the actual intimate physical act of intercourse? So here we have 2 opinions, and therefore, obviously, one needs to be strict, and not even to do the first opinion, because they hold that it is a capital offense and would be punishable by death, even though there is another opinion. Number 10, A man is not punished by the courts for having relations with a married woman until she has consummated her marriage with her husband. Very important. Who's there? Oh, I'm good. Okay. But if we are currently on page 86, right in the middle of the page, third line in number 10. But if she is engaged and not yet married, even if she is standing under the wedding canopy, known, of course, in Jewish law as the chuppah, and there has been no consummation of the marriage, he is not liable for punishment by the courts, even though they're married legally. And even if he gave her a ring and they signed the marriage contract, etc., as long as the marriage was not consummated, they are not married in the sense that if a person had relations with her, it would be a capital offense. By this law, we are referring to a Noachite man with a Noachite woman. Regarding a Noachite man and an Israelite woman, whether she has consummated the marriage or is engaged and has not yet consummated the marriage, or married but has not consummated the marriage, he is liable for capital punishment. If I may, I want to just clarify. I think that what they said over here may be a little bit misleading. And see, for Jewish men and women in Jewish law of marriage, there's really no such thing as engaged to be married. Of course there is, but legally it means nothing. When they were saying engaged over here, they're talking about step one of marriage in Jewish law, which makes the people 100% married. And basically, this is only within Jewish law, amongst Jews. But it's important to know, because then is she a married woman or not? So the two stages of marriage in the Talmudic terminology, stage number one is called Kiddushin or Erusin. And that is commonly mistranslated as engagement, that they're engaged. That's not true, or at least not the way we use the word engaged nowadays. And then stage two of the marriage is when it's consummated. So as soon as the man nowadays puts the ring on her finger under the wedding canopy of the chuppah with the intention of marriage, and he says the declaration, the one line of "You are mikudeshes to me," they're married. And she is a married woman, and if she has relations with another man, that's a capital offense. For a Noachite, we're saying it doesn't work that way. So when they're saying over here regarding a Noachite man and an Israelite woman, so he gets it's a capital punishment, meaning because not that she's engaged, as they put it here, but step one of the marriage, known as Kiddushin or Erusin, was done. That's why she's considered a married woman. 11, in times of slavery. Now, let me give a little bit background, even though this could be a whole class for itself. I'm going to keep it really brief. Not to be confused with other countries and cultures, or for us Americans, most recently, the blacks, until the times of our president, Mr. Abraham Lincoln, Until then, there was slavery in the United States, and humans owned humans as cattle, as property, as subhuman treating them, and which is very cruel, unfair, not good. So when we heard that, when we hear the word slave or slavery, we're kind of conditioned that it's something wrong and negative. That's not what the Torah means. There's a whole section of the Torah in the book of Exodus which speaks about slaves. And in Jewish law, there is a concept of a Jew owning a slave. And that ceased to exist at the same time that the Jubilee years ceased to exist, which basically means there wasn't a very long period of time that it applied the laws of slavery. It was at the beginning of the first temple. So what we're going to say now is theoretical. It's no longer applicable, not just since the destruction of the second temple, since we're in exile, but going back much further. But in the times of slavery, if a Noahide man designated a specific female slave for his male slave and then had relations with her, he was killed because of it. Because it's not his wife. Even though he owns both of these people, they're his slaves, but since he designated her for that slave, the male slave, then the owner cannot have relations with her. She was considered another man's wife, even though they're all slaves. However, the master was not condemned until it had become public knowledge that those particular slaves had been given to each other. So it's not enough that in private he said, look, I want you guys to mate, to make for me more slaves. So therefore, the two of you are to be married with each other. That was not sufficient. It had to become public knowledge out in the street that these two slaves are married. And when did she become permissible again? In other words, when is she divorced? When she separated from him and uncovered her head in the marketplace. That is, demonstrated publicly that she was available to any man. Now, that opens up a whole discussion about married women covering their head. For Jewish people, it's a very easy discussion, and I can go on and bring lots of sources and go into lots of detail. It's right there in the Code of Law and in many other legal works. Here we're talking about non-Jews. So one might make the argument, well, we're talking about slaves. So maybe it was a common thing. How do we know? We're going back, close to 3,000 years ago. What do we know? So maybe it was common for a female slave to cover her hair. And therefore, if she uncovers, or for a female married slave to cover her hair. No, it's not so. Basically, it is common practice, it was common practice, I should say, for married women to have their head covered, Jew or Noahide. And therefore, in this case of the slave woman, how does, if it became known out in the street, in the marketplace, that she is married to that other slave, how do we now let everyone know that she's not? So if she goes out in the marketplace with her head uncovered, that is a clear demonstration of her being not married. So then one can ask, okay, well, what about a regular Noahide woman? How does that work? Well, problem is, if when she's married, she doesn't cover her hair, so then uncovering her hair is not going to be a demonstration of anything. But we've once discussed that a little bit. We're going to leave it for now. We're not going to go there at this point. Okay, let's try to go a little further. I know it's getting late. It's quite late. We'll do one more piece for now. Number 12. The concept of divorce with regard to Noachites is a matter of dispute. Like what makes her unmarried? One opinion holds that there is no divorce possible. Once she's married, until her husband dies, she is married. That's it. And forever, she is forbidden to have relations with any other man. Even if she and her husband hate each other, and he gives her 100 bills of divorce, and she gives him 100 bills of divorce, and they move to opposite sides of the planet. She's still a married woman as long as he's alive. That's one opinion. Another opinion states that no writ of divorce is necessary. Rather, the divorce is dependent solely on the violation of either spouse. On the volition of either spouse. Even if one of them is against the divorce. Okay, and there you go. Unlike Jewish law, they have equal rights. And the woman could say, I do not want to continue this marriage, even if the man screams and says, I give you no permission to get divorced or to leave. She can say, I'm out of here, we're divorced, and she doesn't have to sign anything. She leaves the house with the intention of breaking the marriage, of being divorced. According to this opinion, she is a free woman and she is divorced. They separate due to the desire of either one, and the thing is done. And now she can marry anyone else, even if they're legally married and she did not yet legally get divorced. Others contend that the woman may divorce her husband, but that the husband may not divorce his wife. Again, this is the opposite of the way it is in Jewish law. So this is the third opinion, that a woman can divorce her husband, but the husband cannot divorce her unless she agrees. In other words, she's the one who has to do the divorcing. So we have three opinions, and the Rambam, Maimonides, which is pretty much what we go by, is of the middle opinion that as long as they separate due to desire of either one of them, it's done. So we can rely on that, because in all these things, we do follow the Rambam legally, and we're going to go with the middle opinion with neither of the two, so to say, extreme opinions. So a woman is not stuck being married to one person forever, even if they both want to get divorced, but just beware there is such an opinion. And likewise, the third opinion, that only she can divorce and not him, we also don't follow that, but as long as either one of them wants. Now, the question becomes, what about the law of the land? So let's say you live in the United States. So you're only married if you get a marriage license, and then you have you have to get married. And the same thing, divorce. You're only divorced if you receive a legal divorce. You have to have a writ of divorce. It's a legal thing. So the question becomes, do we have to follow the law of the land or not? So as far as the marriage part is concerned, no. As soon as they live together, meaning that they have intimate relations for the sake of marriage, even though they didn't legally get married, they are considered married, as far as her being a married woman. As far as divorce is concerned, I'm not 100% sure. I think that as long as they separated for the sake of divorce, even though she legally not get divorced, she's not considered a married woman for the Noahide laws, as far as committing adultery if she was with another man. All right. Any questions or comments? I know there's lots that can be brought up in these 3 pages that we just did. Yes, go ahead.
I actually didn't have anything to say. I think this is pretty self-explanatory, and
Okay.
you explained it all pretty well.
Okay. Anyone else? If no one has anything else to say, we will continue. Okay. Page 87, and we're up to number 13. Now we're going to get into an area that until now we were discussing intimacy. Okay, we had that one thing about number 9. To what degree does the penetration have to be full or not? But now we're going to be discussing things which, as you're going to see, don't involve intercourse. 13. One who caresses a forbidden member of the opposite sex, or hugs or kisses in a manner of lust, or has close personal contact for the sake of pleasure, transgresses the commandment prohibiting forbidden relationships, but he is not punished by the courts. Okay, it's one of those cases where it's forbidden. He's a transgressor. He is a sinner. But the court is not to punish the person because they didn't actually do the literal act of adultery. In all cases where the courts are not empowered to act, punishment is meted out by God. Okay, so it will be what we call a punishment from heaven. So it's definitely forbidden, and the person did not get away with it. However, the courts do not do anything about it. So it's very important to know this, and it doesn't mean that it's only a rabbinic prohibition. It still is an extension of the biblical prohibition, just that we're talking about the intensity or the level of the prohibition, therefore the punishment. So it is not punishable by man, by court. It is punishable by the heavenly court. So in other words, all these things are forbidden. Now, if you really want to get into detail, for example, on this one, and again, the laws are very clear and detailed, I should say, for the Jews. And for the Noachites, we have what the Talmud says, we have Maimonides, but it isn't necessarily as clear and detailed. So for example, what about touching someone else, the opposite gender? However, not in any of these forms. So a simple touch is totally permitted. And actually, this would be something which depends on the intent. So you can have two people doing the identical thing. One person can be touching someone's flesh, and there's no problem. They're doing it just to get their attention. They say, excuse me. Or they're handing them something, no problem. And another person, you might say, is a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Perverted, and therefore their intention by simply tapping the person is a lustful one, then that's forbidden. So the same act can be permitted and forbidden. Now, comes up for Jews, for observant Jews, shaking hands, a formal shake of the hand. So there's discussions about that. Basically, most agree. The bottom line is that a Jewish man is actually not allowed to shake the hand of another woman. That's pretty extreme. We're talking about a formal handshake. And the logic basically is that it's a form of affection. It's not like handing someone something and then touching them. But shaking hands is a form of affection, even if it's very cordial and it's very businesslike. Okay, but it's 10 steps removed from an affectionate handshake or an affectionate contact. But it is, in a sense, affectionate. To go that far for a Noachite, I'm not sure that we would say that, because it doesn't say so explicitly. So a kiss would not be allowed, even though, depending on the culture and everything, a kiss can also just be a formality. But that's just because of what we make it or how far we've gone or whatever. But a kiss is 100 times more than a handshake. So even if it's a formality, it's a greeting. The whole point is it's an affectionate greeting. You kiss your parent, you kiss your sibling, which, by the way, is not a problem. Even they say, wait a second, if I'm not allowed to have any type of these lustful contact with a member of the opposite sex, well, I can't have relations with my own mother, so why am I allowed to kiss my mother? Right? Sounds like a good question. So the answer is very simple. And it actually lies in this paragraph that we just did. Anything which is a matter of lust. So that means to say like this. If the person is not an immediate relative of yours, by definition, even just a hug is too intimate. A hug or a kiss. But because the person is someone who a normal, healthy person should not have a physical desire for, like the same gender or like an immediate relative of a parent or a child or a sibling, therefore, unless you're sick, unless you have a disorder, and in your head it's lustful, then you really can't. But otherwise, the assumption is there's no problem of hugging and kissing the same, let's say, a male. For a man to hug and kiss another man wouldn't be forbidden unless he's doing it out of lust. If it's just a formality, that's fine. But say, okay, well, then the same formality for some strange woman. It's just a formality. No, because she's not an immediate relative, she could even be a first cousin. That's too distant. And therefore, it is possible to have a lustful feeling. So therefore, it's forbidden. So a lot of this, it's almost like a gray area. It depends on the intention of the individual. So that's really what we're saying over here, number 13. 14, it is forbidden to signal with the hands or the feet or to wink at any person who is in the category of a forbidden relationship. And again, getting back to the immediate relatives, if what you're doing doesn't have any sexual meaning to it, then of course it's okay. You can wink, depending on what the implication is. You can wink to your father or mother, even though we just said you can't with anybody that's forbidden relationships, unless again you're sick and the implication of that wink is sexually related, then you can't. That's true. Then you really can't. As opposed to the person that he is allowed to have relations with, his own wife. One should not be frivolous or lightheaded with anyone in this category, nor should a man deliberately smell the perfume or gaze at the beauty of a woman who is forbidden. Okay, again, these laws are taken straight out of the laws for the Jews, and they are assuming here that it applies the same way to the Noahide. These laws are not clearly written in the laws of the Noahide. In other words, in Maimonides, in the Rambam, he speaks about the 7 Noahide commandments in the laws of kings. Chapter 9 and 10, the second half of chapter 8. These laws that we just said now, in number 13 and 14, are taken straight out of Maimonides. However, they're not in the laws of kings. They're in the laws of forbidden relations, where there he's speaking to the Jews. So one can definitely arguably say that this does not apply to a Noahide. Then why taking it so far? A Noahide is not allowed to have relations, period. Who said that they're not allowed to kiss or to signal and all these things? But they're taking this approach. And again, I'm not saying that they're wrong, but there is room to argue and say that it does not apply like this to the Noahide. Because my point is, where is it written in Maimonides? And does he make a statement that everything that applies to the Jew applies equally to the Noahide unless we say otherwise? No, he doesn't really make such a statement. Right, because then, yeah.
The whole question of Derek Ertz, is it proper for a non-Jew to conduct himself properly?
Right. So the question is, how do you define that? Same ramifications and guidelines as the Jew, some things are very difficult because in certain ways we're living in a very corrupt times in a very corrupt society in certain areas. So it's kind of hard to get a clear picture. This is telling it to you as it is for the Jew. Like smelling the perfume of another woman. For a Jew, that's forbidden. To say that it's actually forbidden for a Noahide, not so sure.
It's the question of gazing. What does it mean to gaze? It doesn't mean to glance at someone. It means to actually be enthralled with the person or be enthralled with the perfume.
Yeah.
It's not the same as smelling it and saying, oh, that's a nice perfume, but actually being kind of engaged in it. If someone walks by and you think, oh, that's a nice looking person, or you smell the smell and you think, oh, it's a nice smell, that's not the same as really gazing at it.
And for a Jew, would that be permitted? When a woman who walks by and you smell the perfume and you think to yourself, oh, that's a nice smell. No. Even though he's not, trying to get very lustful and all that. Still not allowed.
Even if he has no control over walking past somebody.
That's something else. That's like we spoke about when you go into the mall and they have, music playing or I'm not allowed to listen to a woman sing and there's music of a woman singing. I have to do my best, but there's only so much that I can go out of my way. But yeah, if he has a choice, if he knows that in another minute, a woman is going to go walk by with this perfume, he needs to try to avoid it somehow. Yeah. But otherwise, I can't help it.
Mm-hmm. So maybe for a Noahide, it would be okay.
That's what I'm saying. They're not saying that here. They're quoting straight out of the Rambam, the way it applies to the Jew. They're taking this approach.
But aren't these kind of common sense things. I mean, you don't wink at a man's wife. That's a forbidden relationship. I mean, you shouldn't be flirting with another man's wife.
Right.
So here, when it says to anyone in forbidden relationships, that kind of says that, okay, you don't want to do things that are going to be construed as or given signals that you're doing the wrong thing.
Right. Okay, so you're saying that it does apply.
I would think so, yeah. I mean, I don't know about the perfume thing, because you're going to smell perfume, like you said, no matter where you go. But
Now,
I mean,
let me tell you-
they're saying
let
in a
me-
manner of lust. I mean, you shouldn't be lusting after somebody's wife, because that's
Right.
that's right out the gate, just a thing not to do. So that's a forbidden relationship in my head.
Right. Now, let me tell you this. When I'm not at all tech savvy, I'm very old-fashioned. The fact that I even have one of these is, like, for me, very modern. And I'm still, holding by the landline that has a rotary phone, not even the push buttons. So when texting started and all that, and then as it developed really quickly, and all these different messages, and people would like, right? That's a term. Now, a lot of these words now got new definitions to make. I'm sure they've made a whole bunch of comedy skits out of it. The definition of a mouse and a screen, etc., 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 etc. So, someone, when you're liking someone, or there's another word I remember when it first started, the teenagers were using it, and I felt that's inappropriate for people from opposite genders to be in, or as you guys know much better than I do, in texting, there's all sorts of symbols that you send, like the thumbs up, or the smiley face, or the frown. Well, then there's one that's a wink. So you can say, well, come on. I don't know what's well, come on. It's a wink. So that means to say that it's not appropriate to send such a thing, unless one's going to argue and say, no, you don't understand how it works, which I really don't. And you don't understand the implications. Okay. What I do know is that, without going off into a whole tangent, but that internet did destroy many lives. That I do know. It destroyed many marriages and many lives. It did a tremendous amount of good, no question about that. We're living in a different world because of the internet, no question. The positive is unarguably amazing, amazing, amazing. But part of the huge amount of the negativity is that it has destroyed people's lives and marriages, etc. So I'm not convinced that sending a little innocent heart or wink is permitted. A heart? What are you sending some woman who is prohibited, forbidden relationship for you? A heart. I know you mean to say thank you, or that was very kind of you, and you don't mean to flirt. But a heart, traditionally, and I'm going to argue and tell me, well, it no longer means that, or it doesn't just mean that. It used to mean that, and now I don't know. I don't know enough. I'm just saying personally, it doesn't sit right with me. Or, sending whatever, all the different symbols one can send. You have to be careful. That's what I would say. That's if you're applying it as it applies to Jews, which is what they're saying for sure, and what you are agreeing with.
That is so interesting, Rabbi. Thank you for saying that. If I may, this is James.
Yeah.
I didn't realize, you're talking about characters, and it just goes into exactly what I'm familiar with, that I hadn't been familiar with, is the less than sign and then the number 3 when they first, so it represented the heart, but you didn't have the emoji or the image, so you only had the two characters. And so you were just getting into that. It was just so interesting because I just learned that within last year. So that's wonderful, wonderful lesson. And I appreciate getting involved with this discussion, everybody. Thank you.
And before I forget, next week, we are not having class. I will be away next week, and we should be resuming the week after, 2 weeks from today. And we are up to 15. Number 15. Let's remember that. Made a mark. Yeah. All right. All the best, everyone.
Okay, see you guys next class in 2 weeks.
Mhm.
Thank you, gentlemen. Happy New Year.
Thank you. You too.
How do I-